So since you know all this stuff, we are going to go to where it's everyone's role. Whose role is it anyway? Not whose line is it anyway? No, that's copyright. No, whose role is it anyway? And we're going to talk about the drummer first, because why not? It's a drumming podcast. So the drummer, they should be aware of the variety of jazz styles that are integrated in the jazz realm, like even the eighth note style, swung style. And examples of the eighth note style is like bossa, samba, which are kind of the same thing, except tempo is different. And the tempo is pretty much the main thing that's different. And rock, because those are important things in the swing style, because they integrated it later on when jazz was going on, because jazz is pretty much a boiling pot of all music. And the most simple thing a drummer is known for is keeping steady time. Is always preferred, and try not to be too complex or inappropriate for fills, because this is a common thing that a lot of people do, is they try to be too complex. They try to play something that they don't know, and they sacrifice that for time. Time is always number one. And be appropriate with your fills, because most of the time people don't know how to fill properly. And check out my podcast episode about fills. It's going to help you out a lot, and you don't have to pay really too much money on other people's places where it's like, use this. This is a cool fill, or just some of these cliches that some of these famous drummers are doing. And it's like, no, you really don't need to do that. All your answers are in recordings. Just listen to recordings. So one of the common things that kind of ticks me off a little bit, but it's something that happens, which is one of the common pitfalls for like beginning drummers is playing the bass drum on all 4 beats in a swing style. Now, before y'all start a rant on this, okay, guys, like, don't pause it, don't go away. I am going to explain this. So I'm pretty sure most people know this, to where it's tradition. Why was it tradition to have all 4 beats on the bass drum, or as some people call feathering the bass drum, where you're playing it on all beats? So back in the day, you probably already know or don't know that the reason why we did that was because the bass, back in the day, we did not have amplification back in the early days. Amplification was a later thing for the rock music, just to make things louder. Back in the day, they did not have those things at all. So what the bassist and the drummer decided was, they decided that to amplify the sound, and other instruments do this too, to where that if you have a sound that has close to the same frequency, it's going to boost that frequency. So if the bass player is playing a low range and the drummer is playing with his bass drum, the bass player is going to be a lot louder, and the bass drum is going to be louder because they share the same frequencies, the same area. So nowadays, we don't have to do that, because bassists have amplification now, whether you're doing an acoustic bass or you have a jazz, like electric bass, or just a electric bass, acoustic or electric bass. They both have amplification now. So we really don't need the 4 beats. Now, it's a good tool to use, especially for, like, say, Ringo Starr, for like that drum solo on the end. That was like just a timekeeping thing, like the hi-hats. Now, you could do that as a timekeeping thing, but the most important thing to realize after this is that it's outdated. It was only a tool to help out with the bass player, and we really don't need that now, because they have amplification. They're able to support themselves now. I know. So, and this is one of the important things and all that. So the drummer also needs to learn like simple setups. We were talking about this earlier, about setups that will kick the most important ensemble figures. And this is super crucial. A lot of people miss out with this. And I mentioned about lead trumpet player, because it communicates rhythmically with the trumpet player. So when you set it up, you're communicating with him. This is the downbeat, or this is like my end of the setup. You go on the next one. I'm not helping you out anymore. And it's basically kind of like saying like that. So the focus kind of shifts a little bit when drummers, when there's an improvising section and it's featuring a soloist, all the other members, like whether it's brass, woodwinds, drop out, and only things that are playing is like a combo setting. to where you have the whole rhythm section and you have some brass instrument playing, and it turns into a mini combo band, and then later it turns back into a big band. This is really important to realize. And when I was playing, I didn't even realize that happened, where it started out as a big band thing, and then when it's solo sections, it's turned into a combo, and then after that, it started to emerge back into a big band, and then bam, big band moments. So and not a lot of people even realize that, and it's really important to realize what is going on. So when there are two different big shifts, and to realize a little bit of big band. Big band is a little bit more of improvising within the whole band because you have rhythm music. And in combo, you're actually using your ears and you know the melody of the stuff, but you have to go based on the soloist. It's really important to go with the soloist. So you listen to the soloist, you're being supportive, and as I mentioned, you always have to be supportive within the group. So you have to be supportive. And a lot of people miss out on this idea and don't even realize that. So you always listen to soloists because when you listen to soloists, you grab so many different ideas and you don't have to really do too much work. You just listen to him and you just try to copy whatever it's his rhythm or melodic idea. And I'm talking about all instruments, including bass. So sometimes the bass might pull something a little bit, but he keeps the foundation, keeps the chord note foundation. Which is really important, but you just might do a little bit of a fill, a little bit to just change things up because it's kind of boring playing chord notes. So now this is the thing I want to mention, which is a lot of people don't even realize. I actually got some of this. As of this moment, I'm going to say some stuff that I actually learned from Eddie Gomez's clinic. So Eddie Gomez, he's a bassist and he's played with a lot of people, and he had this clinic at Texas State, and he was talking about jazz combo, and this is a really important thing to mention. So this is like a missing art a little bit, is eye contact, which is a really big communication type of thing. And he talked about his intuition, like looking at all the players because they're all improvising. It's like, where do we end? Where do we solo? And usually it's a weird thing. Sometimes it's hard to explain a little bit, but the best thing I could give to y'all is eye contact. And you could tell by the performers are really, really knowledgeable, is that you could see that they're looking at other musicians because it's a social thing. Like for me, like if I'm doing a country gig or like any other gig that's not jazz, I actually still apply this concept. I look at other people. Because once you look at the person's fingers, you actually see their a little bit of their time, and you copy them a little bit, not too much, but you get a little bit of framework a little bit to where you're looking at their playing and you're in sync with them. Because when you look at their fingers, you are actually seeing when they strike the notes. So this is a really important thing, and bassists should do this too, to where they're looking at the drummer and they look at their ride pattern. And so when they look at that, now if both of the people are looking at each other, that's perfectly normal to do. And I see this all the time when I play. And they notice it. They notice that the drummer is looking at the other person. He's like, this guy knows what he's doing. He's looking when to come in. He's looking at my fingers. And this is a big key thing not a lot of people even realize. And this has actually made me more of a hireable musician. And because I am looking at the person's fingers, and it tells you a lot about the music. So this is a super crucial thing. Now, the bassist, let's talk about the bassist now. They are important for rhythmic and harmonic responsibilities. They have a responsibility which is rhythmic and harmonic, so they have a little bit more dimension in the drums. So it is primary, like I said before, the primary importance was to look at the drummer's right cymbal or hi-hats. Because when you look at the drummer's hands, your timing will improve, bass players. So keep that in mind. Now, the bassist should always be set up as close as possible to the drummer as possible to promote like this partnership of time. And there's a lot of bands that I've been in, and bands, just bands in general. Like sometimes the bassist is not really close to the drummer, and it's really important to be as close as possible to the drummer, because that way you see each other better, you see each other's hands, you're able to hear people clearly, and how they strike the notes. Because if you're far away, there's going to actually be a little bit of a delay in your playing, and not only people think of that type of level. It's where if you're like 6 feet away, there's going to be a little bit of a delay for you to hear the playing. So keep that in mind. Where your bass player is super far away, there's going to be a chance that when they strike that note, it's going to be a little bit of a delay, and you have to adjust to that. Actually, it's going to be such a pain in the butt for you to do that. So make sure that y'all are pretty close together. Now, personal space is good, but I'm just saying, like, get as close as possible with this personal space type of stuff. So, and as like the drummer too, the bass player should know all these different styles, even if the player has limited experience. And also, they should own like an acoustic bass or electric bass. That would help too. And practicing with the metronome too, but don't always rely on the drummer. So practice with a metronome, and it's going to save your life, because your metronome is your best friend. Now, the bass player, during ensemble sections, the roots of the chord are extremely important, because it's the foundation. The bass player is one of those people that has harmonic responsibility. They have to play the roots of the chords, because the piano player is doing something else, guitar player is doing something else. They're not usually playing the roots on a chord. It's rare for them to play the roots on a chord. Well, they're supposed to not play the roots of the chord, but it depends on what style it is. If it's Latin, then there's a little bit of exception, but in jazz, they really don't play the roots of the note. So they should be encouraged to play like the lower register instrument, because that's where this frequency is, and that's really of the, I call it like the living frequency, where it's like it adds more definition to the music. It doesn't make it sound thin. It adds more depth to the music. So make sure you play the lower register. When the music does shift to the solos, there is more freedom for the bassists, and they don't have to sacrifice the time or groove. So they could do a walking bass line, and they don't always, in the combo setting, they don't always have to play the roots. It's nice to play the root, but sometimes you want to change it up. Maybe you want to play the seventh, and occasionally go to ninth. So this is one thing about the bass player that you should know, and all that. And if you are a bass player listening to this, this is probably something you already know, or something that you might have not known before, and so you probably learned something. So the next instrument I want to mention is the piano. Now, piano parts in music, when they're reading music, it is not correctly indicated what their role is. So there are some publications that actually really expand your vocabulary of jazz chords, whether if it's voicings, well, primarily just voicings, because that's the biggest thing, is what kind of voicing should we do in this section of like a C7? I don't know. You're the piano player. I thought you know what you're doing. So they should know different types of voicings, whether if it's Dan Hurling voicings or it's just some chord books that you got from some publication. Try to get those. And it is essential and highly preferable that they play the root position or inversions of the chords in their right hand, not the left hand. Like I said before, the left hand, they rarely double the bass notes in the swing style, but occasionally with the eighth note styles like the swing bossa and all that type of stuff. No, sorry, bossa, samba, or rock. Now, a lot of piano players, some people might get triggered from this, but sometimes they do have to patient practice, and they probably like, amen, brother, and all that. We have to practice patience. So I don't know where that came from, but they have to practice patience because there are many chords notated on the printed parts, but sometimes they do have to play the rest during the ensemble, which is something that Count Basie and Duke Ellington have done, and that is pretty much what they have done. They kind of rest, they have patience, and they just listened to the band, and they were band leaders too. They just listened. So keep that in mind with the patience. Now, during improvisation sections, it's important to be aware of the guitarist and the vibe player, because this is a really big common thing that is a really big pitfall, is that during solo sections, the guitar player, the piano player, and the vibe player are all comping at the same time. And this is a big controversial issue. Who should do what? So before the band starts, they should have a little bit of a formula to where it's like, okay, on first chorus, I'm going to do it. I'm going to play a chorus. Then on the next chorus, you comp, and the next chorus, you comp, and the next chorus, I comp. And so you have a little bit before you start, you have this like foundation to where it's like, okay, first time is me, second time's you, third time you, and then me again on the fourth time. So this is really important. So get your facts straight with everybody, because you don't want everyone plays same times, because what happens if everyone plays the same time, it's just going to sound like a big mess. It's going to be a big fat mess. And it's like it's kind of like not really chaos, but it's kind of like a form of free jazz, to where it's like there's like not really any structure. It just sounds like it's all improvised, which it is, but in that there's different types of context where it's like improvised and it's like not planned. So rhythmically, they are chord players. So the groove should be established by the drummer, bassist, and they watch and listen, but also the drummer and bassist, they watch and listen to the keyboard player and their comp style, and they copy from them. So this is something to keep in mind with the piano player. So we know what the piano player does. Now the guitarist. So there's really, a guitarist shares many roles with the piano player, because it's a comp instrument, and you got vibe players. So with the guitarist, we don't have to worry about vibe player too much, because it pretty much functions the same way as the piano player. But guitarists, there's some common problems that they have. Now, they don't understand the style of Freddie Green tradition. And I'm going to explain a little bit, because my drum teacher, Butch Miles, he played with Freddie Green when he was at the Count Basie big band. So he got to meet with Freddie Green. He got to talk and actually hear and feel the style of Freddie Green, the tradition. Now, the best way to do this is actually like listen to records, and sometimes you can hear them, sometimes you can't. And that's okay. That's actually how it's supposed to be. Now, with the Freddie Green style, he doesn't want to strike the bottom two strings with the guitar. And it should be often avoided, because it creates conflict and tension with similar voices like the piano player or some of the other sections, because it's adding conflict. Now, the guitarist, he's playing core notes all the time, or it just depends on the feel, because he is the one that establishes the feel. And you can hear this in the Count Basie big bands, that he's strumming these chords on each beat, especially the swing style. So you should learn these comp patterns, and like it's just pretty much core notes. From time to time, it varies a little bit, but the foundation is the core notes. Like he's playing the role of the bass, he's playing the role of the ride cymbal. So he is like the foundation. Now, there has to be care into this, and you don't want to do too much of your rock influence, because most of the time guitar players are like, oh, I got a rock influence, and then they play in jazz band, and it's like, bro, calm down. This is not a rock band. All right, this is the jazz band, the jazz ensemble. So you just want to get into the style of the jazz stuff, and you want to play the appropriate sounds and rhythms. And you don't want to be not too loud or too soft, but just right with the amp levels that the person has. Now, cooperation with other comp instruments, I mentioned this earlier too, it's really important when the soloist is playing. And the groove is primary concern. And this is one thing my drum teacher, Butch Miles, said about Freddie Green when I was in rehearsals, and he was talking about the guitar player. And he was saying that you don't really hear Freddie Green in the band, but you know he is there. So you know he's playing, but you can't hear him, but you can feel him. So you can feel his presence. You know he exists, but you can't. It's like seeing, but you can't hear. You can't see him, but you know he's there. So you can't hear him, but you see him playing. So this is one of the key things that my drum teacher, Bush Miles, has said is that, like, you don't hear Fred Green in the band, but you know he is there. So we have talked about each member of the rhythm section now. So that's a pretty long episode, if you ask me. This could have been a two-parter, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to decide to do this as a full episode. So we mentioned like about each member understand the roles. We talked about the goals and everyone's role, their section. And there's actually one exercise I want to give to y'all. If you're in a big band or a rhythm section, there's this game I want to give out to y'all. So this game is pretty much for the rhythm section people, or if you're doing a sectional. So when I was over at Texas State, we actually occasionally had sectionals to where that the rhythm section had a sectional, the brass section or woodland had a sectional, trumpets had a sectional. So there's so many groups that actually had sectionals. And so this is a little game, especially for the rhythm section. So you pick one person, probably besides the drummer, pick one person and have them have the metronome on their ears with headphones, and that person leads the group. So you're going to read the big band chart, and you have to follow that person's time. And it's a fun game. It's a fun game to do because actually you will discover a lot of things. If you're the one with the metronome in your ear, you probably discover a little bit of conflict with the other musicians because one thing is that one, they probably don't have really good time. Two, they are trying to find out where you are. And there's so many things you could discover by doing this if you're the one doing it or the one not doing it. But in my opinion, if you're the one that has the metronome in your ear, you discover a lot of things about yourself because you're the one that's leading it and you're relying on the metronome. So it's really, really interesting thing to discover for yourself. So make sure you rehearse these things. Practice these tips that I've had because these are really, really great tips I'm giving to y'all. And this is just me doing a college course worth of type of stuff and only in this podcast. So keep that in mind. Like I have this jazz degree and I am just giving all of this information out to y'all because I feel like y'all deserve it. Y'all deserve this information that I'm giving to y'all because it's super important, super critical for a musician's life to be able to understand things because this is not just for jazz. Not for jazz just at all, but it's really good to have the jazz element in your playing. That way you're a more versatile musician. You're able to play for cover bands, rock bands, piano bar gigs, major gigs, and you'd be a very versatile drummer or musician. Because you might be a musician listening to all this stuff and you're like, well, now I know whose role it is now. So that's really crucial to have. So I just want to let you all know that because this is a really, really crucial episode to mention about all these things that are going on and what everyone is doing because it's crucial. Yeah, you should know these things. And it's a little bit of history too. Like when I was at Texas State, like I was over there seeing history because my drum teacher was with Count Basie and I actually got to see him play with the Count Basie, with some of the original members of the Count Basie big band. And I was like, man, I got to see some history and actually live in history because, yeah, there's just so many things to talk about, especially Butch and all that playing for Count Basie, Dave Brubeck, Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett. It's just so many great acts and also a lot of great singers too. So he's really like one of those great people to watch and see. So there's just a lot of great stuff that he has contributed and has helped me out a lot. So that's a little bit of that rant. So this is pretty much it for today's episode. And there's really not too much. There might be some things that concept that I have mentioned that might be a little bit different and out of the ordinary, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to have a successful jazz ensemble or just a music career in the long term when you practice on these elements, because these are some things I practice on or try to practice on, and it's going to help out your playing a lot. It's going to realize what your playing style is, who you are as a player, and there's just going to be so many great things to pick up from this. So that's pretty much today's episode for y'all guys. Don't forget to leave a review. That helps me out. And if you have any more questions, feel free to email me. And I'll see y'all in the next episode.